Carole Walker on Times Radio. Thousands of university staff across the UK will walk out tomorrow on the first of another 3 days of strikes. The University and Colleges Union says the action over pay, working conditions and pension cuts will go ahead, although it has agreed to talks at the Conciliation Service, ACAS, next week. Earlier, I spoke to Vicky Blake, past president of the UCU, and she told me why the strikes are going ahead.
The situation in higher education has got worse and worse for us. We've seen the way that turning universities into businesses has led to a reduction of spending on staff. And that has meant lower pay, very poor job security, so lots of people on insecure contracts, and workloads that are really destroying people's health. And within this, students are also being exploited. They're being packed in. And we're seeing unfair low pay and pay inequalities. That's also pay gaps between men and women. There's race inequality pay gaps, disability pay gaps, set to repeat in retirement, because we're also taking action over pensions. Lower pay feeds into lower pensions, and we also have a problem with our pensions, where we're seeing average members set to lose up to 35% of their pension, and the money is there to restore pension benefits back to where they were. So there's no excuse not to do that. You're basically seeing exploited staff trying their very best to support students who are also struggling, who are being forced into enormous debt to go to university, and they deserve the best possible learning conditions. And it just simply isn't right that they're being taught and supported by people who frequently, and I have experienced this myself, to work multiple jobs just to get by.
But you're making the situation for those students even worse, aren't you? I mean, they've already had more than 2 years of disrupted education because of the pandemic. And now they're finding that many of their lectures and tutorials are being scrapped again, as you say, as they're still paying these pretty significant fees.
I understand why you say that, and I think it's interesting to understand that students do on the whole support us, and actually many of our members of UCU are students, they're postgraduates who teach and need to be given proper contracts for their teaching. So it's not quite as simple as that. We know that universities can afford to address pay and pay inequality and to address the problems with pensions. We have tried everything else. This strike is, again, it's what we're pushed into. It's a last resort. Not one of our members wants to be out on strike. Nobody takes joy in losing pay to fight for proper conditions and fight for proper pensions and to fight for higher education. But this is where we are. And I think it's worth looking around the country at the moment, looking at where bosses are trying to do everything on the cheap. It's always worse in the long run. And we've been saying that for a long time.
But you have been offered a pay rise. You have been offered 5%, haven't you?
We have been offered a pay rise. You might call it a pay rise. We wouldn't. We know that, and we've rejected it. We know that the latest pay offer represents a pay cut of 15% for the past 2 years alone. That is equivalent to losing pay for 55 calendar days every year, or nearly 8 weeks. So that last 2 years alone are a 15% pay cut. And we have lost, in real terms from our pay, between 25 to 35% in the last 14 years. And I think it's worth noting as well that we are behind international comparators for pay in this sector.
But I'm looking at figures that show that the average lecturer gets something like £40,000 a year. And many people listening might think, well, that is a pretty reasonable wage to have. And as you know, the government is saying that it can't just issue inflationary pay rises because that will make the inflationary cycle worse.
The issues that I'm talking about affect all of us working in higher education, from lecturers and librarians, counsellors and IT professionals, researchers and cleaners, security staff and seminar tutors, and I could go on. The group it doesn't affect are the very highly paid senior management teams and the vice chancellors in higher education. And I think it's really important that you understand that the employers' body themselves say that surpluses in the sector exceed 1 billion. We are not asking for anything unreasonable. We're asking for a reasonable settlement. And the thing you also need to understand, and I think that many many prospective students and parents would be really, really upset to learn is the amount of job insecurity in this sector. We have over 90,000 university workers on insecure contracts. Over a third of all academics are on an insecure contract. And there are many, many, many staff who are taking part in this action who are struggling to get by.
But there is insecurity in many other sectors, isn't there? And there are, as I understand it, talks due to be held at the Conciliation Service, ACAS. Shouldn't you at least hold off taking more action, which is going to disrupt the education of thousands of students, until those talks are held?
We reject the notion that because things are bad in other sectors, they should be bad or worse in the sector that we represent members in. We think that everyone, every worker deserves a fair deal. And as a trade union standing up for our members' rights, we think that that is the right thing to do. We know that there are wider strike actions happening across other sectors because those unions also, as directed by their members, believe that they need to fight for better for their members. And I really reject this race to the bottom argument of that's bad over there, so you should have bad over here. We know that there is money in the sector to make a proper and fair offer, and we need to see the conditions addressed alongside pay. And I think it's really reductive to think about this only in terms of pay, because there are those other aspects to our claim. And yes, you're right, there are talks happening being facilitated by ACAS. I really and truly hope, as does each and every one of our members, that those talks encourage our employers to make a sensible and proper offer to us that shows that they really value us.
So what sort of offer would you need to see in order to call off more action? And there are already more strikes due to take place in addition to those taking place this week.
I think it's important to understand that the people who would call off our action are our members, and it would be them who decides whether an offer is good enough. But clearly we've put in a claim that says that we need to have an offer commensurate with inflation. Now, what we have on the table is nowhere close to that. And the point of a negotiation is to make those arguments and hear each other and look at what is realistic and look at what is possible.
So you're talking about an offer of around 10%, are you? Because nobody's getting that at the moment, are they?
I mean, I think the fact that nobody has that on the table at the moment is why there are so many strikes happening across many sectors at the moment. And I think you could look to the sorts of inequality that we have riven through the system. The ratio, for example, of Vice-Chancellor pay to the pay of the lowest paid in the university is quite extreme. And there is lots and lots of avenues that universities could use to look at how they could better manage themselves, spend less money on capital projects and spend more money on staff. We know that during the COVID emergency, many, many employers took emergency steps and they prioritised staff costs. And we believe that they can and absolutely should be doing that again in this cost of living crisis. And it is absolutely insupportable that they would not support their staff. This is a vital part of our economy. It's a sector that is vital for our future, for students' education, for research, and it is a very, very important part of local economies as well.
Well, that was Vicky Blake, past president of the UCU union, speaking to me a little earlier here on Times Radio.